So just to highlight the key benefits, you can perform typical SVN change operations like folder or file addition or deletion, file locking, unlocking, check in modified files into SVN repository, getting the earlier or later versions of files from the SVN repository, and see the color-coded version differences between multiple files in the SVN repository or file which is there on your local setup as well as the one which is present in the SVN repository. Apart from this, you can link files which have been changed in the SVN repository to any item in Digitay by either using the SVN client or using Digitay directly. Linking of these files is also helped by validations which ensure that the commit is made against the correct file, against the correct project item by the correct user, and management of the configuration items is easy and reviewing them is easy through the advanced features which we have provided on the SCM configuration tab as well as the feasibility reports which we have at the project level. So to begin with, let's walk through a demo scenario that will help us illustrate how Digitay's integration with SVN does value add at each stage of a typical defect lifecycle. So let's consider a project team working on a critical application maintenance project which is using Digitay Enterprise for defect and issue tracking and SVN for managing its software code. So to improve the quality, the aim is to critically review every code change by reviewers. But the challenge for developers here is that developers have to list all the files which have been changed as part of that fix. And the challenge for reviewers is to locate each of these files in the SVN before reviewing and making this entire process prolonged and cumbersome. So I'll show you how the Digitay SVN integration helps make this more smooth and seamless change of operations between the applications without actually switching tools. So let me just open up a developer node here so that I can demonstrate this change to you. So as you can see, I've logged in through my SVN client, and all the color-coded files which you see in red are the files which have been changed by the developer on his SVN repository. So these are the files which are necessary for fixing a defect, and when he commits the changes to the file or group of files, we have given a hook in the SVN client or say an add-on capability with this SVN integration which prompts the user to provide a commit message. So typically a developer will select a file and say commit, and he will be prompted with a commit message. So here what the developer can do is provide the project ID and the item ID against which this file needs to be linked directly. So since most of my comments are cached when I check in or commit changes into my SVN repository, once I have provided these project ID and the item ID, I don't have to type them out each time. I'll have them pre-populated through this SVN client feature, and I'll add my own comments of the file change which I've done. So in this case, I'm just adding a silly comment saying comments added for resource plan and demo purpose. When I say commit, what it will do is it will check for the project with that project ID and an item with that ID which I've provided. In this case, what I've done is I've provided an action item. So the SCM tab configured against the action item should have that link of this file change which I've just made. So let's go to this item. When I go to the SCM tab, I see that the resource plan changes which I had just made have been linked to this item, as well as my comments of my commit message has also been added here. So along with this, what also happens is when the application checks for a project or a project item, it also has additional checks which ensure that the correct user is performing the operation against this item. So in this case, the user, the developer, was assigned to the performer stage, and that's why the commit went through. So as I was saying, if the current workflow stage of that item is not the configured stage, it will prompt at the time of the commit itself that the current workflow stage is not the performer stage, or if the person who is performing this commit operation is not assigned to the workflow stage. So in this manner, through this additional capability of on the SVN client side, we have ensured that the changes which the developer is making are done on the fly as he commits the changes directly from the SVN client. He doesn't have to navigate or search for that file in the application, as well as validations ensure that the correct file, the correct item is getting linked into the application. Another way of linking a file to a project item is directly logging into the application and using Digiday for doing that. So let me just show you that as well. So as you can see, I've logged into the application and I've logged into the project called Success Maintenance, where I've configured a SVN repository which is mapped to my SVN repository on my local setup. What I've done here is I've configured a SCM configuration tab against the defect eForm. So when I navigate to any of these defects, I can link the files or delink the files which are present in the SVN repository. So in this case, I can easily delink the files which are present, as well as when I click on the linking icon, I'm prompted with a screen which shows me the SVN repository structure which is present on my local setup the way it is. So I get to see the entire folder structure along with the files present in those folders. Now I'm aware I just performed a commit operation for multiple files, so I can enter the revision number directly and see which are the files which have been updated against that version. So it shows me that against the revision number 921, 3 files have been modified in this case. So if I would have added or deleted a file, it would have shown the icons accordingly. In this case, I have modified 3 files, and that's why all these 3 files are being shown. I can also check whether I'm linking the right version of this file by just simply clicking on this View Changes option, wherein I get to see what exactly was the change I made when I performed this commit. So I see I've added a new literal or a string here. Now these changes again are also color coded for easy interpretation, and what you get to see here is, since I've added a couple of lines, I've seen that with a green plus icon, and the modification and deleted are also shown in a color coded way. I can also browse through these changes quickly by using this array options rather than searching for the changes which are made in the file if it is a huge file. So I keep on using them to check through all the changes which I've made in this file. Once I know that I've chosen the correct revision number, I simply say attach files from the revision, and immediately all these 3 files will get linked to this defect. As you can see, all have the file version 921. Here too I have an option to compare the current version of the file as well as the previous version of the file directly. So I can use this icon to check the version difference here itself. So the next step of the defect cycle would be of the reviewer, where he logs into the application and checks what are the changes which have been made against a defect. So in this view, what we have done is we have provided few features which will allow the reviewer to analyze all these changes quickly or easily. So if the reviewer just wants to view a file, we have given an option where he can just view the file in the browser, the entire file without any changes or color coding. If he wants to download the file, he can do that by using the download selected file. As well as if there are multiple files with the same version linked here, he can also compare the versions of different files. And most importantly, he can change the view to see which are the files which are committed for a particular version. So ideally, a developer commits his file changes at the end of the day. So instead of looking for files for a particular date, he can change the view and view the files as per the file version. So I see for 921 3 files were updated, or I can simply change the view again and see what are the changes made to each of these files. One important column here is of that of the comment, so the reviewer can easily understand what was the purpose of this change, as the comments directly refers to the commit messages which the developer had provided at the time of making the commit operation. So we saw how a reviewer or a developer can view the file changes directly from the application, and how all these files can be easily reviewed for analysis through the color coding which is available for the various file version differences. He can disassociate files, he can download the files or check the versions which are available. Another option I would like to highlight is when the reviewer is also checking the files, when he directly clicks on the file, he gets a window wherein he can check multiple file versions or view the file version differences, and if he has a local file available for the same, he can select that file for difference. So if a reviewer or a developer who is working on a file, he wants to view the changes which he has made locally with the file which is already present in the SVN repository, he can perform the operation of file version differences quickly to understand where all the code merge needs to be or will be performed by the application. So project manager can also review changes to the files linked to multiple project items by using the traceability reports which we have at the project level. This report will show the traced items and the linked SVN files which are present in Digitay. So in this case, what we have done here is we have multiple defects which are belonging to a specific release. We have tagged them as per the release. So when I pull up a traceability report, I select the traceability maps and I get to select whether I want to view the SCM associated items with them. So from this report, I get to know which issues were converted into defects and which files were associated with those defects, so that it is clear and it is easily publishable of what all items are actually getting changed as part of this release. So you can use this advanced filter present on the defect, create one to understand which are the files which have been changed for these defects. So another report is the exception report, wherein I can only view all the defects and the files which have been associated to it. So in this case, I have created an advanced filter which would fetch the defects which have been linked to the 6.5 release. So I see all the defects with the item name, the status, and the source files which have been associated with those items. I can also navigate to the item directly and view all these details, or download files, or view file version differences the way I just demonstrated. So the same details are directly available here. I would also like to show about the SCM capabilities, the typical SVN operations which can be performed in the application. So in this case, when the project manager logs into his project, he can navigate to the configuration management and the SCM integration menu. So here too, he gets to see the entire SVN repository file structure which is present here. And he can perform the typical SVN operations which are related to the file or folders. So he can go about adding a new folder, he can delete a folder, he can add a new file. So for example, if I'll add a new file from my local setup here. And add my comments against it. So this file gets added directly into this new folder which I have just created. And when I go to the SVN client and what I'll just do is update. So in the new folder, I'll see that the test file 3 has been added. So the change or the file addition which I performed through Digitay is also getting synced up in my SVN client automatically. The operations which I showed you regarding the file version differences can also be performed from this view. A project manager can also lock or unlock files, which is important when a team member is working on a file which doesn't need to be merged or worked upon by multiple team members at the same time. So you can click on the file, select the file and lock that file so that he can download it and work on it on his local setup. As well as if he wants to perform modification of a file, he can select the file locally and commit the changes directly into the SVN repository. So in this case, as you can see, I have updated the connection helper.java and just perform commit from my SVN client. So when I go to my folder for the connection helper Java, I get to see the changes which I had just performed from the SVN client. So the changes which I just made are seen here, and I can quickly have a look at the changes which I had made of adding a new variable here. So the changes which I just performed from Digitay application or my SVN are getting synced up as I perform them in real time. So your local SVN repository as well as the operations I am performing from Digitay can be done without actually moving back and forth between the two tools if required. So just to summarize the advantages which we saw in today's webinar is that with Digitay SVN integration, you get direct access to the SVN repository. You are not relying on the SVN repository which was locally available to you on the intranet. You have access to the same information, the same repository directly from Digitay, whether it is folder based or file. Users can download those files as well as perform the typical SVN operations as well from the Digitay interface. Developers can associate SVN files to project defects or any other EPROM where they can configure that SCM tab so that they don't have to search for the relevant file while performing the commits from their SVN client. The reviewer's job is also made easy because all this information is collated on the SCM tab, which has all the features for easy comparison of the previous and the current versions of the files. So whether he doesn't have to depend upon a different tool to view the differences because all those are browser based now and you can view it directly from the application. And just to consolidate all this information, we have traceability map reports which will give you mapping between the SVN files and the project items so that all the changes which have been made for a specific kind of items can also be generated, a report can be generated for publishing or to keep track of all the changes which have happened against the project items. So overall, Digitay's integration with SVN delivers a comprehensive, flexible, scalable and easy to use source code management solution more suitable for a collaborative kind of environment where there are multiple team members or distributed groups working on the same repository. So just to conclude this webinar, I would like to add that the Digitay Subversion integration is sold as an add-on element and is priced separately, as well as the linking of the repository files with the project item which I demonstrated. It's currently hard-coded and this is an add-on capability which the Digitay SVN integration has. It can be provided as per your requirement, whether it's based on the validation on the team member or the workflow. We can customize it as per your needs. And for all these details on how this can be done, you can contact the Digitay sales or the support team for more details for pricing or evaluating this module. I'll throw it open for a Q&A session now. If any one of you have any questions, please post it in the Q&A box in your webinar. So I have a question coming up from Dushyant who's asking, is there a support for doc files? So ideally all the software configuration management or the source code management is done for Java files or text-based files. So the file version or the file differences which you view are line-based. So a doc, you can use the SVN repository or use this integration to keep in sync with the files which are present in the SVN repository. But as far as the file versioning or differences is concerned, you may not get the same kind of leverage there, as this is mainly intended for IT organizations or development groups who will be maintaining the software code files. So it's typically Java or text-based files where line-based differences are getting compared or reviewed. So a question from Neeraj Kumar: can we perform the operations related to SVN from internet as well? I mean, out of LAN. So I think your question is whether SVN is required. I mean, whether you should be able to connect to the SVN repository. So let me just show you one part of the application which is related to the configuration that will help you understand how exactly this works. So typically what a project manager would do is he would, once he's inside his project workspace, he will go to configuration management, SCM integration. He will set up a connection between the SVN repository which he has on his local setup and the Digitay application. So in this case what he will do is he will first provide the root, the project root which he needs to connect to. So in this case I have provided the folder name, and then he will go on to provide the SVN username and password. So based on this file permissions or changes which can be made to the files are getting governed, as well as what all folders from the SVN repository are accessible to him will be shown to him based on this. So in a way you are establishing a connection between your SVN repository in Digitay, and that's why you are able to make changes to the files in the SVN repository directly from Digitay application. So the answer to your question is yes, you can make file changes to your SVN repository over the internet, because Digitay as an application is available over the internet. So you have that added advantage where you can directly have access to the SVN repository and commit changes back to the SVN repository directly from the Digitay application. So one way where I showed you how you can perform changes back into the SVN repository is you can add files, or you can say commit selected files. So you can select the files from your local setup which you want to commit changes to, provide your commit comments and simply say add, and the same will be shown in the SVN repository back. So Neeraj Kumar had followed up his questions requesting why do I need to click on update in SVN. So updating is, I mean, this is something which is based on your SVN client, whether you choose to update it periodically or whether you want to see the updates from your SVN repository as you say update more. So this is more or less a feature required or performed directly on the SVN client. Otherwise, the updates are directly getting updated directly into the SVN repository. It's just to view these changes in the SVN client, I have to use the update more or update option in the SVN client to sync up. Right. So yes, Dheeraj, you are right. It is a very good feature of Digitay in that case, because it will actually enable teamwork from home if required without VPN connection. But I would just like to add that you will have to have the SVN login credentials configured to your SVN repository. That is essential or a prerequisite required to connect to your SVN repository. Probably once you go through the prerequisites or the configuration which is required to have this done, you will have more clarity on this. But yes, definitely, if you have access to the SVN repository, you can connect it to Digitay and perform all the SVN related operations directly from Digitay. So I have a question coming from Mr. Currently we have SVN integration. Looks like we have an older version of the SVN client. Is there a new version of the SVN client available? If yes, how do we upgrade to it? So the SVN client, it's actually depends upon the organization which SVN client they are using. In this case, I'm using Smart SVN. There are other organizations who would use Tortoise. So based on their own preferences, they will use the SVN client. We are not providing any SVN client along with this integration, as more or less this is governed by the organization, and it is a third-party component which needs to be used by the organization itself. So the SVN client will be decided upon or used by the organization. What I used here in this demonstration is the Smart SVN client. There are other SVN clients, like I said, Tortoise, which can be used, and depending upon their preferences or usage, they could choose other SVN clients as well. You can still ask for any questions, or if you have any concerns, please do update on the chat for Q&A. Okay, thanks, Dheeraj. I think we answered all your questions. We hope to hear back from you. If you have any other feedback, please let us know. We'll be following up today's webinar session with the presentation which I use for the webinar.
We may have one question, Bhavesh.
Sure. Go ahead. Hello.
Yeah, just a minute. Someone is typing in the question.
Okay.
It's Jainul Abdin. So to answer your question regarding another session, we may have this session again, but the timelines are yet not fixed, because we already have a schedule for almost 4 more sessions in the coming weeks. So that we will be publishing today. So for this particular session of SV and integration, we will let you know for it via email. Are there any more questions? So I think we are done, Bhavesh. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks all for joining.